Our next witness is the second anonymous witness of the day. In her case, there will be no live streaming, either video or orally. She's witness 2033, and in her case I make the following order. The name and address of witness W2033, the name of her late husband, and the name of any other member of the witness's family, and any other identifying information, such as the witness's image or a description of their appearance, cannot be disclosed or published in any form unless express permission is given by me or by the solicitor to the inquiry acting on my behalf. Witness W2033 must be referred to only as Mrs. A.S. That's Alpha Sugar, A.S. This order remains in force for the duration of the inquiry and at all times thereafter, unless otherwise ordered, and I may vary or revoke the order by making a further order during the course of the inquiry. That's the order. May we please have Mrs. A.S.
Mrs. A.S., your full name is known to the inquiry. Could you please take the book in your raised hand and repeat after me? I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Mrs. A.S., you're going to use your husband's name during your evidence, and you may also use your children's names, but those names are covered by the restriction order and mustn't be repeated outside of this room. You're here to tell us about your late husband, who died after contracting hepatitis C, and you've provided us with a photograph of him, and it will go on the screens at some point during your evidence. We've had a slight technical glitch with it where you were anonymised in it, which didn't help us in this room, but it will be shown on the screens when it reaches our technical team. But again, that photograph is also covered by the restriction order. Your husband and you ran a very successful industrial roofing business.
That's correct.
And you've described him as an intelligent, highly skilled man.
Yes.
You got together with him in 1986.
Correct.
And then he had a road accident in 1987.
Yes, he did, yes.
Can you tell us what happened?
He was coming home from work and we collided with another vehicle. The fire brigade had to retrieve an eye out of the vehicle, and he had a fractured pelvis and he had leg injuries as well.
And he was given 6 units of blood on one day?
Yes.
And then a further 2 units 2 days later?
That's correct, yes.
You've obtained his records,
yes.
And in the records there are specific details of the units that were given to with the numbers of those
Yes,
products.
there is, yes.
So it was known precisely which blood units your husband had received?
Yes.
Was your husband contacted during the 1995 look-back exercise as someone who'd received blood in the relevant time frame?
No, not at all.
Before we move on from that, I want to look at a document from 2006 after your husband died. You were involved in an article in your local paper about his death.
Yes.
And raised the issue of the look-back.
Yes.
And the journalist told you that the hospital had produced a media statement in response, specifically about the look-back. Yes. And this is what they wrote. It's document 2033003. And the document, the Trust spokesman said, blood made available to hospitals for use in transfusions is the sole responsibility of the NHS Blood and Transplant Authority, formerly the National Blood Authority. The Chief Medical Officer's look-back exercise in 1995 was coordinated in this region by the National Blood Authority's Regional Transfusion Centre, the RTC. When proper testing for hepatitis C became available in 1991, the RTC started checking donors. If a donor was found to be HCV positive, the RTC then traced the final destination of all earlier donated blood products from that donor. The relevant hospitals were then contacted to check their records to see if any patients had received blood products from that donor. At this point, it would then become the hospital's responsibility to counsel and check the HCV status of these patients. This trust never received any instruction from the RTC to check its records against blood products that would have been relevant to the deceased. The reasons for this need to be taken up with the National Blood Authority's Regional Transfusion Centre. It's not a matter for the Trust, and there's no evidence whatsoever to suggest that the Trust failed to comply with the Chief Medical Officer's guidance. And then there is a note to editors at the bottom that says the CMO, the Chief Medical Officer, anticipated and fully understood, see Annex B, that there was one major limitation to the look-back exercise, namely that not all of those transfused with potentially infectious blood prior to commencement of testing will, however, be identified by the look-back procedure, as this relates to donors who've given blood since HCV testing was introduced in September 1991. And you consider that this shows a fundamental flaw in the look-back exercise?
Yes, I do. We were never contacted. There was never any information about it. And it just seems a failure.
Your husband went to the GP regularly during 1997 with renal colic.
Yes, he did, yes.
And looking at his records, you found a number of blood tests showing raised liver function tests.
Yes.
Was there any follow-up in relation to those blood tests
None
at that
whatsoever.
time?
We had no knowledge of them. They were actually done for the liver tests, no knowledge at all.
You then think there was another missed opportunity to diagnose your husband in July 1998.
That's correct, yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Lost his driving licence. Silly man. I was very angry. And to obtain his driving licence back, he obviously had to have a liver function test, which would determine whether he was fit to drive. We contacted the doctor. We made arrangements to have the liver function test done, and the results came back clearly that there was a problem with his liver. But when we went to see the doctor, the way he was speaking to us, it was though he thought he had a drinking problem. But prior to having the test, had abstained from alcohol. There was no alcohol in his blood when he was actually tested. I think that was the road the GP was going down. He didn't say as such, but I think that was the route he was going down.
And you're clear that your husband didn't drink heavily
No.
because of the nature of his work?
It would have been quite difficult if you're working on a building that's very high up. You don't go around drinking or having a lot of alcohol, do you? Plus, periodically, if you're on a major building site, you can be tested for drugs or alcohol due to safety issues. You know, if you're abseiling down a building, you want reliable people doing that, don't you?
We've provided your statement to the GP, Dr. Webb, and he's provided a statement in response. He says that he did not assume your husband was an alcoholic, and he sent blood tests for hepatic viral serology, that the local laboratory did not test for hepatitis C and was unable to do so. He simply received the results of the hepatitis A and B tests that they had completed and understood that hepatitis had therefore been checked. And we can see that from a document from your husband's records, yes. 2033004. Towards the bottom, it's not a very clear copy, but what we can see is the date on the top left corner, the 10th of July 1998, and at the bottom, other hepatitis, hepatitis B negative, other hepatitis, hepatitis A negative, and there's nothing indicating that hepatitis C was tested for.
No.
Coming on to 2001.
Yes.
Sorry, before we go there, you also phoned Dr. Webb, the GP, after he died.
I did, yes.
And what was that conversation about?
The conversation, I think I was angry. I hadn't seen Dr. Webb since the day he came to authorise the patches and things so I could slowly slip away. And I phoned him really to see if I should be tested for hepatitis C. And that was my first question, should I be tested? And he said there wasn't really any reason to be tested because it was highly unlikely that it would be passed sexually, which is fair enough. And I don't know, I must have said, well, died of hepatitis C. And he said, well, yes, in hindsight, the conversation may have been wider, but I remember those words significantly in hindsight. And that's made me quite angry.
Your recollection in your statement is that he admitted in hindsight he would have carried out a hepatitis C test on your husband.
Yes.
In his response, Dr. Webb has said he has no recollection or record of the telephone conversation. Going on to 2001, looking back, you've questioned whether some other symptoms that your husband had in 2001 were perhaps linked to hepatitis C.
Yes.
And represent another missed opportunity for the diagnosis to be made. Can you tell us about those?
Well, I noticed he didn't like being in the sun. He kept scratching. He said he used to itch, and I couldn't see the reason why. He did have a loss of appetite, and towards the end he did become impotent. These things now I see could be related to the hepatitis C virus. I actually think he did very well to last as long as he did without any real symptoms until the end. That I think some of those symptoms probably I noticed now.
He also had an arthroscopy in his knee,
Yes.
and he had difficulties with it, and they had to wash it out. And again, you question whether any tests were ever done at that point or should have been done, given that he was in hospital, whether something should have been picked up.
Well, obviously he had hepatitis C, and it's a viral infection. And when he came home, his leg just blew up, and then he had to go back, and that's when they found a huge blood clot, and it couldn't stop bleeding. I think then, would they have picked it up though? Probably not.
On the 14th of October 2004, your husband phoned you and asked you to book a GP appointment.
He did, yes.
What was wrong?
He phoned up and said that morning that he had coughed up blood. So, of course, I was rather worried. My immediate thought was he probably had an ulcer or something like that. So he got his workmen to bring him home. He was actually he was building at the time. We came back. I tried to make a GP appointment, but I couldn't get in. So we went to our local hospital. That was, and there he took a urine sample, and we just gave him a quick check over, and then he advised us to go to see our GP the next day. We got to the GP the next day, and he was obviously concerned. We didn't really have any idea, but he did write a letter to the hospital saying that could he please see this gentleman and to put in force the 2-week rule. So then I think we became a little bit suspicious that it was something sinister as to what we didn't know.
The following day, he was admitted into King's Lynn Hospital.
Yes,
And he had endoscopy procedures and a CT scan.
yes.
And what were you then told at King's Lynn?
We were told after, I think it was round about the 27th of November, that he had hepatitis C. And we had no idea. It was just like a big bombshell. We didn't know what it did, but we knew it wasn't good. And the prognosis wasn't that good, really. So then they decided to send him to Addenbrooke's.
He had a liver biopsy at Addenbrooke's on the 11th of December.
Yes.
And you went to collect him from the hospital and met with Dr. Alexander,
Yes.
the consultant hepatologist.
Yes.
What were you told?
I was told that liver was 25% cirrhosis and 75% cancer. His portal vein had been compromised, and that there was nothing they could do for him.
You were told that he had only 2 or 3 months.
I asked, he said, well, how long have I got? And he said 2 to 3 months. And I just wanted to get out of the hospital. I wanted to, I don't know, it was like a blanket went over me. I couldn't think clearly or straight. I just wanted to get home, out of the hospital.
What was the effect of that diagnosis on your husband?
He was very calm. He didn't want to talk about dying. He carried on really quite normal. Of course, it was October, November, and one of his great passions was shooting. And he couldn't give up that. He still went shooting on some of his shoots. But he never talked about it. And I was quite anxious because there was me sort of counting 3 months. It could be 2. It wasn't, it was. And I'm thinking, well, what am I going to do? I have a business, I have a home, lots of responsibilities, commitments that and I had made that I couldn't stop. And it was quite, but I still had to keep up that appearance of just being with the one I loved. Simple as that.
You didn't feel able to talk to friends about
No.
it. Why was that?
Because most people didn't understand hepatitis C. I think most of them, again, thought it was due to alcohol or drugs. And I didn't want people assuming things about that were known not to be true. You know, his real close friends knew, but I didn't talk about it much. But if I did talk about it, I felt I had to explain that I had a blood transfusion. He's not an alcoholic.
We've got the photograph that you wanted up
Yes.
on the screen.
So happy.
Him.
And that was in 2000, so it's just 5 years before he died.
And then you wanted us to show a photograph of your husband at Christmas time when he deteriorated physically very considerably.
He did, yes.
And we've got that photograph. It's 2033006.
And we had to sit there that Christmas knowing that it was the last one. And that was... But he still kept up a brave face. He didn't show any signs of anger, or he just seemed to go with the flow. Funny. He did.
He took you out for dinner.
Unfortunately, yes, because my birthday, sadly, is the 20th of December. And he desperately wanted to take me out for a meal. That was hard. That was very hard. But we did, and we got through it.
And he even went shooting just 4 days before he died.
He did, yes.
He was
did.
determined to keep going.
He was determined. He was not going to let it beat him. He didn't want to do that.
But he died in as you say, just days
Yes.
after
diagnosis.
he'd phoned you vomiting blood. You've said in your statement that his deaths hit you extremely hard.
He did.
Can you tell us a little of that?
Oh, when he died, I was in my mid-50s. You know, I'd got a home that I couldn't afford to run. I lost everything. My insurance companies didn't pay out. And it was devastating. I lost my home. I was homeless. And then ended up in a hostel. And then I eventually got back on my feet. And I got a job in Asda. And that was in 2011, 10. 9 or 10, I can't really remember the exact date. And then 2 years later, I retired. I would be more financially better off if I retired than keep working, because my pension was better than what I could actually earn.
You'd received stage 1 and stage 2 payments from
I did,
Skipton,
yes.
but they had all gone into trying to save the house, which you then lost.
Yes.
And as you say, you were homeless, and you remember spending your last £25 on a bed and breakfast.
I do, yes. And I thought, what am I going to do now? So then I went to a hostel.
And you lived there for 2 months
Yes.
in 2009. There was no accommodation that the council could offer you.
No, none.
You'd also lived a little while with your mother,
Yes.
but eventually and you'd also sold property in Spain
That
to
was
try and recoup
Get
some of the money to keep a roof over your head.
I did.
You're now renting a home from your son
And daughter-in-law,
daughter-in-law,
Yes.
and that gives you much more stability.
Oh, it does. It's such a relief to know that at my age, I've got a place until I go, more or less, and that's quite a good security. It is.
And you describe in your statement that now you're slightly better off financially, but things are still very tight.
Yes, you have to watch your pennies all the time. I don't do extravagant things. I don't go out. I don't run a car. To be fair, I think I've become a little bit of a recluse, which I quite like, but it's not really the way it should be, really.
Could we put up the other photograph again, please? You just mentioned that you can't afford to run a car.
No.
Why is that particularly difficult in terms of being able to go to the grave?
Well, it's difficult. I can't go to the grave unless I catch a bus, which isn't always convenient. I know my son and my daughter-in-law would take me any time, but if I go to the grave, it's, for me, it's personal, you know. It may seem strange, but I'll probably talk to him or something like that. But then again, I don't have to be at his grave. He's with me all the time. But I suppose another thing, I'd probably have a bit more independence if I had a car. I just rely on my bus pass to go anywhere. So, yeah, it's difficult.
You have some observations about the provision of financial assistance. Although with EIBSS you found that you're more stable, it's
Yes,
not ideal,
yes,
but it's a bit
that's true,
better.
yes.
You've said in your statement that you object to the fact that you've been drip-fed the money.
I agree, you know, like if you want something, you have to beg for it. You can't just go and say, well, look, I need this for some reason. Yes, we have been drip-fed. Sorry, I'm sorry. Yeah, I agree with that.
You say a bit more in your statement. You say that you feel you never really have control of your money.
No, you don't. I rely on my income from my pension to determine how much help I get from EBIS. So I'm still not in control. You know, they determine how much I will get to top up my pension.
You mentioned a moment ago that you've become something of a recluse socially.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that and the emotional impact of
I
the
don't
loss?
tend to go out much. I don't mix much. I think you lose your friends. Well, I lost my best friend. You know, when you actually work together, live together, have a social life together, and then all of a sudden that's gone. You lose your friends that you had at school. It's difficult to make new friends. And so I think that is what made me become a bit more reclusive, don't go out much. And I think that was the main thing. I lost my best friend.
Throughout your husband's illness, did either of you receive any counselling or psychological support?
No, none whatsoever.
And have you received any since then?
No, none whatsoever.
Do you think it would have been helpful to you?
I think if we'd have had more explanations about the effects of hepatitis C, that would have helped me. But we didn't have any knowledge. It was never discussed in the hospital, probably because it was too advanced. So there was no way of treatment, no liver transplant. So probably that's the way they thought it. But when you've had something that's destroyed your life, if you know a bit about it, it's probably easier to come to terms with it. But we didn't, so I was very angry.
And can you tell us anything of the impact of his death on your son particularly?
I think it hit very hard. He's very quiet, but I think he was very shocked about that. And because he worked with my husband, again, he's had to start his own little business up. But the whole family, my daughter as well, affected her profoundly. Everybody it was a knock-on effect, because how it affected me affected my son, my daughter-in-law, my grandchildren, because it was a knock-on effect. My anger probably was hit out at them sometimes, wrongly, but you sometimes do that.
And you've said in your statement that you've been left with a very significant number of questions about what happened and why he wasn't identified earlier.
I agree, yes, I do. The look back obviously failed, but then I don't know because they had to look for donors. It was very difficult. My MP did try and help, but he thought it was a bit of a shambles as well, I think, by his comments.
Mrs AS, those are the questions I have for you. I'm just going to turn to Mr Locke and Ms Gibbs and see if there's anything else they'd like me to raise. Just one point they've asked me to raise. You mentioned just a moment ago that you raised the look-back issue with your MP.
I did, yes.
And there was a letter back from Caroline Flint in which she said that unfortunately the look-back was unable to identify all patients who may have been infected. And she said in her letter that the Department of Health was running an HCV awareness campaign. You have some views about that as well?
I haven't seen many campaigns. I've been to the GP and I haven't seen one. I haven't seen it on the media. Beggars the question, why? Why not?
And in your statement, you say that compares very starkly to other conditions.
It does, yes.
Such as the AIDS campaign.
Yes, I think we all remember that. But never anything about hepatitis C. So, yes, yeah.
Is there anything else you would like to say?
Yes, just a short statement. Every witness statement is a tragic reminder of the thousands of people who have suffered the effects of these deadly viruses. Families broken, loved ones lost. I hope the inquiry will bring justice for everyone who has been infected and affected and compensated accordingly. I would also like to thank the Contaminated Blood Campaign for the continued support they have given to myself and my family. But last but not least, for my beloved, I miss you.
Well, it's obviously it's not easy for anyone with a breathing problem who wants to keep yourself private. You describe yourself as a bit of a recluse.
Yes.
To come and share what are obviously painful memories. Thank you very much for sharing those with us and your thoughts on what happened.
Yes, thank you.
Well, we'll take a break now until 20 to 3.
Just to clarify as well, the next witness is not anonymous. She was put on the list as anonymous because we weren't entirely sure, but she won't be anonymous and the live stream will be restarting.
So the next witness is known as Kerry, is she?
She is, yes.
Well, we'll hear her at 20 to 3.
Thank you.